Good morning, everybody. And thank you for encouraging me to proceed with these Dharma talks. I don't know if the microphone is picking up the sound of the rain on the roof. I doubt it somehow, but maybe. So I was at Green Gulch, the practice period. And I think I was saying how I had already, on my first practice period, decided to go ahead with the second practice period. So this daily practice was not just stretching forward for 8 weeks, but there would be an interval and then it would start again. And I could see that the interval, 6 weeks or so, when I would not be staying at Green Gulch, when I would be doing some traveling, that would be when practice was more difficult. So eventually, in early '96, I came back to Green Gulch for the second practice period. And I'd like to say, back to the first practice period, yes, I could see that there would be these 2 practice periods. And then there would be the summer. So you're not in practice period during the summer, but I would still be at Green Gulch, still practicing. And the idea of practice took on this sense of just projecting so far into the future, beyond the mind's eye or beyond the horizon. It was like what Suzuki Roshi talks about in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. You're on a train and the tracks are thousands of miles long. There's no real end in sight. Practice was taking on this shape of something that you do daily, always. Your life becomes practice. So there was the second practice period, and then there was the summer. The schedule in the summer was not a whole lot different from the schedule of the practice period. The work day was a little bit longer, and there was not the daily 1-hour study period. And there was just as little to look forward to. But I formulated this idea, and it went something like this. A practice period is set up to make practice easier, because the number of options open to you are greatly reduced, and because there's much less to look forward to. you set up your life in a practice period so that practice is at the center. And as we moved into the summer, practice was still at the center because you're living at a temple. But the practice schedule was somewhat reduced, lessened. So I thought, practice period makes practice easier, but not everybody is ready for a practice period. You have to have a certain amount of practice energy to be able to give up all the things that you're used to and do a practice period. And then I thought, Tassajara. Practice, the schedule is going to be a lot stricter at Tassajara. Again, practice is made easier, but again, you have to be ready for that degree of intensity. So I got this idea that city center and Green Gulch were great places for beginners to do a practice period. And then Tassajara would be this place for intermediates to do a practice period. But then as you became more, we'll say, advanced, it was good to come back to Green Gulch or the city and then go from there into the outside world. So it was as though you gradually give up things from the outside world in order to intensify your practice. And then you come back towards the outside world where practice becomes more difficult, but because you have that intense period of practice at Tassajara, you're able to maintain a practice under those more challenging circumstances. That was the way I was thinking about it during the summer. I also noticed that the schedule was a lot lighter in terms of practice during the summer. And I realized that that didn't mean my practice had to be lighter. So after dinner, I would go to the Zendo for Zazen, even though there was no Zazen on the schedule. And I saw that 2 or 3 other people had the same idea. One of them was Diana, whom some of you know, Diana Gerard. And she had already been to Tassajara. And she told me, you like it there. At Tassajara, you live to sit. That sounded good. I was already living to sit. In Zen practice, we take great care in setting the scene for ceremony, for Zazen, for temple life. Great attention to detail, great precision in setting the Zendo to be just so. And in that setting the scene. It's like the proverbial finger pointing to the moon. Setting the scene to make some sort of insight, some sort of shift in perspective possible. The shift where you realize it's all the same day. In thinking about setting the scene, I remember decades ago, I had a girlfriend, and I would go to visit her in Dublin. Go to visit her for dinner. And as you make your way to the bathroom from what was her house, you have to pass the bedroom, and the door would be half open, the bed perfectly made, and a bedside lamp lit. It was like an invitation. Something similar to that. When you come up from the Zendo at City Center and into the Buddha Hall for ceremony, you may be one of the first up, or you may be one of the last up. But the scene of the sunlight entering the room through the large windows, the drifting incense smoke being caught in the sun's rays. The scene is set to be simply present. And this being simply present, that simple presence is evoked in so many Zen scenes. So the idea of practice going on into the far distant future. The daily routine with little to look forward to. All this helping to ease the transition into seeing it's all the same day. After last week's talk, a friend sent me an email with a link to a discussion. And the discussion was Spinoza, an atheist's God. Now, before I get into that discussion, I would like to say that I think it was my third practice period at Green Gulch. That is towards the end of '06. or it may actually have been the first one, I'm not sure. But I had this great, or I thought it was great, shift in perspective. I could see how God, the word God, could be another name for what we call in Buddhism the absolute or the unconditioned. Some people had made that suggestion or made that analogy, that God was just a term for the absolute, or the absolute another term for God. So I entertained this thought for a while and imagined myself going back to Ireland and practicing as a Catholic with my newfound understanding of God. And all the rituals in Catholicism would be simply mindfulness exercises. And in orienting myself towards God, I was doing what I was doing at Green Gulch, orienting myself towards the absolute. But the things started to break down when I imagined some dialogues that might take place. Phrases like, it's the will of God. Phrases like praying to God for certain things. This is where it didn't quite work. Yes, we can call the absolute God, but then my understanding of God is different to what most people's understanding of God is. It doesn't facilitate dialogue. It confuses it. So I stayed with my Zen practice and stopped entertaining such notions. Back to the discussion. I listened to this discussion on the internet with some interest. For Spinoza, God is nature, was nature, is nature. And this seems to be Einstein's God as well. As the interviewer said, well, why not just call it nature? Because using the term God confuses the issue. The interviewee agreed, but said that for Spinoza, this is what God is, nature. It is not like the theists who say God is in nature. God is everywhere. For Spinoza, God is nature. But I still think there's too many culturally inherited notions about God that would then be transferred to nature. Still, I think we can entertain maybe some question as to what is nature. Nietzsche had a very astute observation. I forget which book I picked this up in. But he said it's not simply important to ask if what a person believes is true or not. It's also important to ask, why does the person believe that? What is the motivation or gain in believing that? What is the gaining idea? In Buddhism, early Buddhism, there is some mention of the unconditioned. Nirvana is outside the realm of conditionality, and hence it is a refuge. The unconditioned of early Buddhism became known as the Absolute. But the Buddha was very wise and very careful not to get into metaphysical discussions. He repeatedly said, I teach that there is dukkha and the cessation of dukkha. We can get into endless speculation and discussion about what does it mean to say God is nature or nature is God. But don't let that distract you from the central part of our practice. We're addressing the question or issue or phenomenon of dukkha. Having said that, I do love the literature and the poets and the filmmakers who are, through their art, able to conjure up a sense of the eternal in the particular. A few days ago, it was wonderful summery weather. We had a few days of really gorgeous sunshine. And I went out to have a look at my young trees. And it's really great to see some of them putting forth the first leaves, the buds opening up. But some of them had been overgrown by grass. And the grass had such a hold on them, it looks like the grass was holding them and then the wind snapped them. They should grow back. But some of them had been so overgrown by grass, and this is not like grass that you see on your lawn. This is more like grass that would become as if it was wheat, tall grass Some of them had been blown over with the wind and the grass and were practically invisible. I just knew that we had planted them at such a pace apart and could root around and find them and free them from the grass. But as I did this, it started off with 3 layers, and with the heat of the sun, I got down to just the 1 layer of the t-shirt. And I couldn't help but think of Patrick Kavanagh's poem. It goes like this. It's called Antenatal Dream, or Dream Before Birth. I only know that I was there, with hayseed in my hair, lying on the shady side of a haystack in July. A crowd was pressing round my body on the ground, prizing the lids of my eyes open, and you'll be wise. The sky that roared with bees, the row of poplar trees along the stream struck deep and would not let me sleep. A bour tree tried hard to let me see it grow. Mere notice was enough. She would take care of love. A clump of nettles cried, we'll saturate your pride till you are oozing with the something of our myth. For we are all you'll know, no matter where you'll go. Every insect, weed kept singing in my head. Thistle, ragwort, bluebottle, clegg that maddens cattle were crowding round me there, with hayseed in my hair. Setting the scene so that in the particular we can get a sense of the eternal. There's a wonderful scene in Philip K. Dick's novel, The 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. So to this particular scene, I need to set some background. He's writing in the 60s, and the novel takes place in the 21st century, our century. And planet Earth has become so hot that you cannot safely go outside into the sun, not without some kind of protection. I think it was called a solar pack. And so there is a salesman whose name I forget. He orders his taxi, and as it comes up, he leaves his apartment building and walks across the street with his solar pack on and gets into his driverless taxi. And he's a salesman for what's called Perky Pat's layouts. Now, Perky Pat's layouts, it's simply a board that you lay out, but the board has a scene on it. And then there are these miniature figurines that go with the board. And they all have all sorts of accessories. There's houses that the figurines fit into. There's cars that they can drive or sit in. And they keep making advances. So one advance is that they have a garage next to the house, and the garage door actually opens by remote from inside the car. And these are very popular, these layouts are very popular among the colonies on Mars, where conditions are extremely harsh. In and of themselves, these layouts are nothing but ornaments. But what the people in the colonies do, they sit around the layout and they take a drug. The drug is illegal, but a blind eye is turned to the people on the colonies because life there is so harsh. The drug's name is candy. And when the people take this drug, they enter into a kind of collective hallucination where the scene laid out before them becomes reality. Perhaps it's a little bit like Zoom. We all gather around our computer screens and enter into a different reality. So I came up with a thought experiment. I think it's called Gedankenverbindung, in honor of Einstein. He is famous in the scientific community for his thought experiments. Imagine you're in an empty space. There's no up and no down, no left, no right. There is light, but it's not exactly white. It's not blue. It's not gray. There's just a sense that there is light. But you can't see anything. And you have on your head glasses. And on each lens of your glasses, there's a lever that stands out over the frame. And you're able to move the lever on either side from left to right, back again on either side. And let's say that there's 100 marks on the top of the frame for the lever to be positioned at. And so you move the right lever through those 100 positions, and nothing happens. So you move it back to 0. And then you move the left through those 100 positions and nothing happens, so you move it back. Then you move the right one to position 1 and the left through all those 100 positions. Nothing happens. Move it back. Move the right one to position 2 and the left one through those 100 positions. Nothing happens, move it back. So you continue on like this until, let's say you get to, for amusement's sake, 2020. Or maybe it's 3020. And suddenly, everything around you is blue. You're floating in the midst of a blue ocean, which seems to stretch infinitely above you, below you, to your right and to your left, all around. You're kind of stunned by this blue. And in that blue, something comes towards you at great speed and just goes right by you. Not through you, but by you. And then there's an interval of nothing happening, something else comes towards you and goes right by you. You can't make out what it is because it is moving so fast. But you pick up one or two details that makes you think green Tara. And then something else goes by and it makes you think Manjushri. And then maybe something moves much more slowly towards you and you're able to see clearly Avalokiteshvara. You have gone from the Dharmakaya into the Sambhogakaya. And after staying there for a while, you begin to wonder what else can you come up with. You change the dials and bang, there you are standing on a beach at sunset with the waves lapping, a guitar playing, people gathered round a campfire singing Kumbaya, my Lord. You're now in the Nirmanakaya. And soon you tire of the Kumbaya, so you change the dials again and you're overwhelmed. You land in the middle of a busy street. People pushing past you, the noise of traffic, the smells of traffic. You don't like it, so you change the dials again. And you end up in an even busier street. You've gone, the first one we'll say was Birmingham, and now you're in Delhi. And the crowds are so thick that you get squeezed out onto the roadside where a truck almost runs you over. And as you step back, somebody pushes the glasses off your head and you turn around only to see a motorcycle go over them. You're in the thick of the Nirmanakaya. And maybe you wonder, how did I get here? And because you ask the question, the memory of karmic events that led you to this place come to mind. The flight from Birmingham, and also what comes to mind, the motivation for this. The motivation to meet what the papers have been talking about as the world honored one. You make your way from Delhi to Bodh Gaya, where she is reported to be hanging out. And you go there, and eventually you meet her. And she says, I teach that there is dukkha and there is the cessation of dukkha. Are you in or are you not? If we continuously make an effort to be present, if we continuously pay attention to what is going on, as Dogen says, if we take the backward step that turns the light inward, our sense of the present becomes narrower and narrower and narrower, and then it opens up. But unless we're making that effort to be present, we just get lost in speculation and distraction. And no matter how much we think about and talk about the eternal, we never actually get to taste it. During that first practice period, I was saying last week that I had two things turning over. There were more than those two things, but those two things particularly. The true practitioners of old had nothing to look forward to. And your lucky day is when you realize it's all the same day. So at the end of that first practice period, no, before the end, there was a Shosan ceremony where everybody in the practice period got to ask the leader of the practice period, Abbot Norman Fisher at the time, a question. And it's a ceremony, and there's a lot of attention to how it proceeds. The stage is set for this Dharma inquiry. The teacher sits on a chair. And a good distance away from the chair is a bowing mat. You bow. I forget if it was bowing to the teacher or bowing to the altar. When you finish your bows, you ask the teacher a question, and the teacher gives an answer. If you're not completely of the opinion that the teacher met the question, you can have a rejoinder. And the question that you ask should be one line. There's not like a paragraph before the question. Just ask the question, get the answer. Maybe have a rejoinder. So my question was, where has yesterday gone? And Norman, with equal force, said, "I think it is in between today." I felt as though my question had been met. But that doesn't work if you say it to somebody on the street. That can only be set up in context. The stage has to be set. And we don't know what stage is being set by this COVID practice period. Before this all started, I had watched a Netflix series on the Roman Empire. And it's kind of like intriguing and somewhat appalling to see how people lived. Well, particularly the ruling class, perpetually worried about whether somebody was going to try and assassinate them or not. But Rome had its plagues. And one of them, around the time of Marcus Aurelius, that was called the Antonine Plague. Plagues are not new to humanity. What does seem to be new is how it gets reported on the media. So the plague of around 160 of the Common Era is called the Antonine Plague. I've no idea why. Nothing to do with Antony. It's sometimes known as Galen's Plague, after the Greek physician who described it. The next plague of note in the Roman Empire was in the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries. And I just love the way words are made and formed and so forth. This was named after Justinian. And if Justinian's name had been Justin, it probably would have been called the Justinian Plague or the Justinine Plague. But because his name was Justinian, to make it, I think it's an adjective, they had to tweak it a different way. It's the Justinianic Plague. And Wikipedia says, recent research suggests that this plague was actually the bubonic plague. It's the same bacterium. And then, of course, we have later in Europe the Black Death or the bubonic plague. So here we are in the COVID outbreak. Way more than 1.5 million cases worldwide, and more than 100,000 deaths so far. But somebody sent me a link during the week. And almost as good as a science fiction novel by Philip K. Dick. There was an intriguing conspiracy theory. And what makes a good conspiracy theory is the fact or the idea that it just might be true. This is not the outlandish conspiracy theory that says the COVID-19 virus was delivered to us by aliens via a meteorite. That's not conspiracy theory. I'm not too sure what that's called. But this conspiracy theory suggests that the illnesses that people are experiencing are being caused by 5G. And that there is no actual virus. That the virus is actually a hoax to cover up for the 5G. And that nobody has actually studied the effects of 5G radiation on humans. And I think, what if that was actually the case? I'm not sure I would do anything different. I'm not sure if anybody, well, maybe they would stop wearing masks and we could start wearing spacesuits, white clothing to reflect the radiation that may be delivered to us from these 5G satellites, and then the towers that are being unrolled, put out during lockdown. Does it change your behavior? When you start to think of nature as God, do you not end up transferring some of your previously held notions about God, transferring them onto nature? Why do we believe what we believe? What is the gaining idea? I teach that there is dukkha and the cessation of dukkha. I'll close with a poem by Kavanagh, Canal Bank Walk. Leafy with love banks and the green waters of the canal pouring redemption for me, that I do the will of God, wallow in the habitual the banal, grow with nature again as before I grew. The bright stick trapped, the breeze adding a third party to the couple kissing on an old seat, and a bird gathering materials for the nest for the word, eloquently new and abandoned to its delirious beat. O one worn world, enrapture me, encapture me in a web of fabulous grasses and eternal voices by a beach. Feed the gaping need of my senses, give me ad lib to pray unself-consciously with overflowing speech. For this soul needs to be honored with a new dress, woven from green and blue things and arguments that cannot be proven. For this old fool needs to be honored with a new dress, woven from green and blue things and arguments that cannot be proven. Thank you all very much.